Okay, chapter 19, number 3. Okay. Welcome back. We looked at capital structure in an imperfect world where getting into financial trouble can be a real problem, perhaps even a killer for companies. But planning capital structure today only around possible future bad times is like calculating an expected return only from the downside. There could also be many upside lucky outcomes in the future. We have to design a capital structure today that is aware of value implications in a good future too. So, preceding was mostly about bad times. Subsequent will be mostly about good times. Now, as a manager, do you prefer running a bigger company or a smaller company? Why?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Well, most managers prefer running bigger companies. They like empires.
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Debt reduces the financial flexibility of the firm. It thereby limits bad acquisitions. Unfortunately, CEOs actively work against that in the name of preserving their financial flexibility. In other words, they say, I'm going to spend your money. Here's another interesting consideration. Say you're the CEO. You've just made $100 million of profits, and you have two choices. You can either buy a brand new Gulfstream jet with beautiful furnishings, your own private pilot who can take you anywhere, and a nice little cabin attendant who will help serve you the drinks and the shrimp and everything else. Or you can pay out 1 cent more in dividends to your shareholders. So, corporate jet, you can go anywhere you want very quickly, or 1 cent more to shareholders. This is the decision that you have to make as the CEO. Which one would you choose?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Well, most CEOs choose the jet. There's a severe moral hazard here. By the way, all people are very good at self-justifying what's best for them is also good for others. So they're not going to say, oh, I just like the jet. They're going to say, well, I'm so much more productive this way. It's good for the company. They're not going to think about this, oh, let's go out and screw our investors and owners, especially if their peers also have nice jets. There are a few investment bankers that have actually done that, but for the most part, people don't do that. For the most part, they try to justify that as being in the interests of shareholders, even if it's obviously not. Turns out we know that it's not because privately owned companies, for example, companies that have done a leveraged buyout, in which case they are owned by a small private entity, rarely own any jets. The only companies that really own large jet fleets are publicly traded companies. Here is another question for you as our manager. You are the manager. Our company is very profitable. And remember, it was financed, purchased by our investors. Now, would you rather spend your time fighting union demands for higher pension promises for a distant future? Would you rather just give in and treat your employees very, very nicely, overly nicely?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Well, typically, you would rather kick the can down the road. You can promise large pension benefits. You're going to be long gone when they have to be paid out. You would be applauded by the unions, by the newspapers, by the locals for how employee-friendly you are, how you value community relationships. On the other hand, if you fought the union, you would be considered Scrooge. Now, the problem is far worse in the public sector, where the unions often elect mayors and the city council. I'm going to digress for a moment about unions And feel free to disagree with the material in my digression here. Contains some personal views too. You are not yet management, so be objective, please, on both sides. Firstly, let's not always blame just the unions. They have good aspects and bad aspects. For example, American car makers have lost to German, Japanese, and Korean car makers over the last half century, not because of their bad unions. They lost primarily because of their bad management. The unions just did their job. They are supposed to hold out for better arrangements for labor. They are supposed to get more money to the employees. It was management that shirked its responsibility. What the union did was just right for what they were supposed to do. Why was it the union's job to be the grown-ups here? By the way, what are the incentives of union leaders here? Now, I am not particularly fond of unions, but not necessarily because they got more money for the people working for them. I object to the fact that they have very inefficient negotiated work rules most of the time. In particular, I have a lot of experiences at UCLA. If you have really bad employees, they become incredibly difficult to fire. Worse, I cannot even reward good employees appropriately. So we have these wonderful people that work at Anderson, administrators, assistants, and they work their hearts out, but we are not allowed to pay them more money. So, hello, United Auto Workers 2865 at UCLA. Yes, our graduate students are organized by the United Auto Workers. We also have the Teamsters Chapter 2010 here at UCLA. What do we have to do with Teamsters? No, as bad as it is in the private sector, and there it's usually actually not that bad, public sector unions are socially incredibly problematic. They are organized one-issue voters who de facto often elect the politicians that are supposed to negotiate with them at arm's length on behalf of tax-paying voters. So, we have teachers' union. The teachers' unions have made our voters reluctant to approve higher school taxes. I would love to pay more money for better schools. However, what happens is I know that if I get taxed more to give more money to schools, this will only just sickle away in the teachers' union getting more. This, the fact that the voters no longer want to support their schools that much, hurts our kids. The teachers' unions do not represent our children. They are supposed to represent the teachers, not the children. In some sense, this is their job, and we must realize this. Incidentally, this is also the case with companies. They often also help to elect politicians that are supposed to regulate them, and again, it's no longer the arm's length relationship that it should be. Governments are not as benevolent, as efficient as we would like them to be. Now, in modern firms, most key corporate assets leave the building at 5 p.m. every day. Good companies treat their employees well. They share their profits with their employees via equity and high bonuses, not via salaries. Good companies fire unethical and bad managers. Now, companies that have market power, monopolies, don't necessarily compete to be run much better, so it's hard to tell. So when a company has market power, it's the only employer in the region, I am far more fond of unions than I am in an environment like Los Angeles where there's thousands of different employees. If you don't treat your employees well, the employees can leave. They can walk out the door and work for your competitor. Typically, bad management behavior, bad work rules, capricious decisions, low salary creates unions often in the first place, and it's often the fault of MBA students that we've educated badly. Today's employees and many, not all, private sector unions already realize that they have a stake in the health of the company. Now, unions have their own agency problems, and they often care less about a specific firm than they care about the industry. I know many instances where the unions forced smaller firms to go out of business because these smaller firms could not afford the union rules. And the reason why the union did this is because it could demonstrate its power to the larger companies. Okay, if moral hazards are large, coming back to capital structure, what security, debt or equity, would this favor?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Again, debt. Debt limits the flexibility of managers. Thus, it is the better security when moral hazard costs are severe. When the debt burden becomes large, however, all sorts of other issues arise. And just remember our last video, we talked about risk shifting. Risk shifting means the equity likes to take projects that are very risky because it gets all the upsides, but not all the downside. We discussed this. So, if the firm takes on a lot of debt to curb moral hazard concerns, it typically also needs to assure potential creditors against its own selfish ex post temptation to do nasty things to creditors, in particular, to take risky projects that aren't worth it, or even just to try and confiscate the creditor's credit. How can the firm assure the creditors not to do that?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
The firm needs to try to promise not to do bad things. That's usually done with bond covenants. There are various types of bond covenants. There's 4 in particular. The first one are covenants that say something about what the firm is allowed to produce, invest in, sell, etc. So it may say it needs to maintain its machines, it needs to maintain its factory, it cannot sell off its factory, etc. The second is dividends. Those are limitations on the firm paying out all its money to shareholders and going bankrupt afterwards. The third one is financing related, has to do with seniority. So if I've issued credit to you as the firm can then say, oh, but we're going to sell now senior securities that come ahead of you. That would hurt me because the senior security would get the money first. So these covenants say there's got to be limits to financing. And then the fourth one have to do with things like bonding. So I may oblige myself to always provide fully audited financial statements to the creditor. Managerial risk aversion, I don't like to go bankrupt, and reputation, I want to play this game many times, can help, as can convertible securities. Now, should you issue a bond with a covenant that says that you cannot take very risky projects in the future?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Yes and no. You want to write a covenant that prevents you from taking a negative NPV project just because equity likes more risk. It's a bad project for the overall firm. Unless you can contract to prevent that in the future, your value is going to drop. Unfortunately, if your covenant is too strong, it could prevent profitable, risky projects to be taken too. So, what if a project comes along that has either minus $50 or plus $1 million with equal probability as potential payoffs, and you represent the creditor, and as creditor, you have the ability to say, my covenants here say that you must not take a project that can lose $50. Will you accept repayment of the bond at par? So let's presume this bond here still has $1,000 on it that needs to be paid in 5 years. The project itself only comes around for the next 1 year, and you come to me and you say, okay, you know what? We have to pay you $1,000 in 5 years. Here's the $1,000. Would you accept this?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
No. As a creditor, you have what's called hold-up power. That is, you would demand as a bribe to allow this project to go forth the profit of this firm minus $1. You want to get the entire value for waiving the covenant. What can the equity do? Now, covenants are a delicate balancing act between preventing you from wanting to take bad projects exposed because they shift risk from shareholders to bondholders, and preventing you from taking good projects exposed that come naturally with more risk. So it's a balancing act. Creditors should similarly also fear payouts, priority changes, implicit priority changes. There is also something called an exchange offer that can actually expropriate creditors. We're not going to discuss them in detail, but they are there. When the assets are collateralizable, like a building, that makes covenants a lot easier. Thus, they often have higher debt burdens, like mortgages. Do firms write covenants only when they issue bank debt, where the bank will insist on these covenants being included? Or do firms also institute covenants voluntarily when they issue public debt, i.e., when there is no creditors present on the table to negotiate with the firm just writes out what it's willing to issue, goes to the market, and tries to sell this?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
It is in the interest of the borrower who wants to issue debt at a higher price to assure creditors. Otherwise, they cannot sell their bonds for high prices. So they will put in the covenants themselves. There are other factors. Convertible bonds, for example, allow the creditors to convert their debt into equity. So think about the previous example where you had a project with downside, but a huge amount of upside. Well, if you have a convertible bond, in that case, you could suddenly participate in the $1 million upside. In this case, the project is not necessarily so bad for you anymore. There's also a callable feature to the bond, which means that the firm can always call the bond, that is, pay off the bond at the full amount, and thereby retire it. So if the minus 50 plus $1 million project comes by, then it can just retire the bond so that it is then allowed to take the project. If creditors are worried about ex post behavior, what security would this favor? Debt or equity?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Well, it would favor a minimum level of equity, enough equity so that you don't run into these risk-shifting incentives. It would favor debt only with good covenants too. You couldn't just issue any kind of debt. Now I'm going to switch subject and to talk about information symmetry. This one's really important and very interesting. I'm going to assume for illustration we have a perfect market. Going to be risk neutral. The expected rate of return, the cost of capital, is 0. So there is no time value of money here. Let's presume you're a penniless entrepreneur who is good at and enjoys drilling oil. You have an opportunity to develop an oil field. And that oil field has a 50% chance of success, in which case the oil field is worth $7 million. It has a 50% chance of failure, in which case only the land is worth anything, and let's presume for argument's sake it's still worth $1 million. And let's presume you have to raise the financing. That is, it costs you $1 million to put up the drill rig. What is the expected value of this project?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Well, the present value of this project is $4 million. It's either $7 million or $1 million with equal probability. Of course, the net present value of this project has to subtract $1 million, which is what it costs to put the original oil drilling machine on the soil. What would you expect to ultimately retain?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Well, to raise $1 million, you can promise $1 million in repayment. The repayment is assured because even in the worst case, the land is still worth $1 million. Since we're using a cost of capital of 0% for illustration, that just makes it easier. You would be left with $3 million. What about raising $1 million in equity financing? What would you expect to ultimately retain?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
You would want to raise $1 million. The project itself, without the $1 million, is going to be worth $4 million. So you could promise 1/4 of the project, worth $4 million, in exchange for the financing of the $1 million to put the oil rig on top. The new shareholders, therefore, would receive either $250,000 if there's no oil, or $1.75 million if there is oil. Again, that comes out to $1 million. You would retain 3/4, the remainder, again for a present value of $3 million. Remember, the new shareholders are just providing the money at a fair interest rate. It is you who owns the key project. It is you who owns the net present value here. The shareholders and creditors are competitive. Now, let's presume you have just developed a better nose, a big nose. You can smell whether there's oil in the ground. Does this special skill help you or hurt you? How much would you have to promise to debt if you wanted to finance with debt? Remember, you know whether there'll be oil coming out or not.
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Well, the creditors don't care. They know that you will have the funds, $1 million, for repayment. Everything is sufficient here, regardless of whether there's oil there or not. $1 million. Now, how much would you have to sell in equity if you wanted to finance the oil rig with equity? This is where it gets real interesting.
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Well, earlier we said you have to sell 1/4 of the project in equity. If you already know that the whole is worth only $1 million, you would obtain $1 million in funding by selling the equivalent value of $250,000, the 1/4 in equity. But if you already know that the whole is worth $7 million, you would obtain the $1 million in funding for the oil rig by selling the equivalent value of $1.75 million. Now, what would you issue if you knew there was oil in the ground? Well, if you anticipate it's going to be worth $1 million, you would prefer to raise the funds with equity. Why? Because it only costs you $250,000. But if you anticipate the project is worth $7 million, you would prefer to raise the funds in debt. You would not want to sell the $1 million for the equivalent of $1.75 million. This is called the winner's curse. It's also called adverse selection or inside information, sometimes even asymmetric information. If you know your project is better than what the outsiders expect, you would prefer financing it with debt and keep more of the equity. The outsiders, on the other hand, are not stupid. They're going to assume the worst if you try to sell them equity. So they're not going to give you a good price for the equity. Is the winner's curse worse when you have cash in your bank account or if you have relatives that are very wealthy, or when you provably have no such alternatives?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
Well, the investors would assume the worst if you don't put all your own skin into the game. You need to assure them that even if you are the $7 million guy, you could not issue debt and you're coming to them trying to sell equity because that is just not feasible. Alternatively, you must convince your investors that they know everything you know, so that there is no more winner's curse, there is no more asymmetric information. This is a huge issue for entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. If you think about it, typically the scientists inside the biotech startup, the software programmers, they have more information than the venture capitalists and more information than the outside investors. So unless you can convince potential capital providers that you have all possible money, all possible skin in the game, you've leveraged up all your credit cards, you've mortgaged your house, you've mortgaged your children, they're not going to want to give you money. There's something called a pecking order. That basically means that firms have ordered preferences for financing their projects. You first have to finance with your own cash first, with a mortgage you take on your house. If this is not sufficient, you can issue some securities like debt, but only after you've proven that all your own skin is fully in the game. And after you've issued debt, only then, if you can convince potential equity investors that you have issued as much debt as possible, will you convince them that they will give you equity at a reasonably fair price. So, information asymmetries can cause a pecking order. By the way, so can other forces that make debt cheap. If inside information considerations are large, what security issuing activity would this favor? Would you issue more debt or more equity?
Please pause this video now, answer the question on a piece of paper, and then continue.
It would favor issuing debt. No one would give you a fair price for the equity you might issue, fearing that they will be taken advantage of. That's it for this video and for the bright side of debt. In the next video, we'll cover a few more considerations when thinking about capital structure and summarize the whole thing. We'll close off the page. See you soon. Bis bald.
So you say you have a PhD in literature?
That's right. Harvard. Summa cum laude.
Okay, so what's the main feature of a Greek tragedy?
Bankruptcy?